This is a clip from our podcast From the Ground Up. We're on YouTube and Spotify, Apple Podcasts and all other podcasting platforms. I hope you enjoy it. If you like it, then make sure you check out the full episode. The link will be in the description. So for anyone who doesn't know you and your story, could you just give me a snapshot of you and what you do, the different businesses that you own?
Yeah, so I've got two businesses with my business partner Tyler. We've got Newman Rose Property Group, which is a property development company. And then we have Property Ed, which was rebranded into that probably started this year now, which is a property education company that specialises in education around property development and also property investment. So my family business, Cassidy Group, is property development. My dad's a property developer, was a builder when he was younger, became a property developer. So I've always been around property. I left school at 18 on a gap year, and my ongoing thing is that I'm still on my gap year because I just started working and then never, went to uni in the end. I was going to do medicine, set on it, and then my dad was like, why just do property? Like, it's the logical thing. Yeah. So that's why I went into property, and then naturally my skill set, lended me to not just property development. I also for many years did land agency, so like sourcing land development deals basically. So yeah, the reason property development over your typical sort of investment flip sort of things was just because that's where my knowledge base was.
But before the kind of leap where your dad said, why don't you get into the family business, there was literally you didn't participate in the business in any kind of day-to-day function or anything like that?
No, not beyond just hearing conversation at the dinner table. It was never really a thought to go into property. It just was never an option to me. I was always thinking I have to go to higher education. And even then it didn't cross my mind to do something property related in higher education. And then that was it. I got into it because I started working a bit for my dad, and then I was like, actually I quite enjoy this, and then I moved to work in land agency with other people in that first year, and then that was it.
So you did land agency for your dad or for a different
company?
Okay.
It was for Fine and Country originally, which are an estate agent. I did that for maybe 3 or 4 years. I was a land agent.
Straight out of sixth form.
Yeah.
You went and did land agency.
Yeah, and that was what I did for 4 years.
Yeah,
I think
that's
it was 4
crazy.
years.
But you weren't involved in the business before that. In your family business?
No, not in the day to day. So it always did surprise me how much I knew, but it was just always spoke about at home, if that makes sense. And
you mentioned you had a skill set in finding off market deals using mapping software and stuff like that. Where did you get that skill from?
Obviously I had to teach myself how to use the mapping softwares.
Yeah.
But that's they're quite simple because they're designed for old property developers to use. So that was quite simple. But the planning knowledge as to because obviously not every piece of land can get planning, right? It's only certain ones, and even the ones that can, it's what can they get planning for. Understanding that is, I guess, a skill set, which I didn't realise I actually had just from, if I hear something around me, I remember it. That's that's my USP as a person, is I'm like a sponge. So I guess I just, growing up, just learned it. Obviously, I looked at what my dad would get planning for, and I could kind of understand the journey behind that. Maybe it was a brownfield site and there's a certain amount of massing there, and then logically you're replacing that with residential massing. That all makes sense, and I could translate that into looking at a piece of land and picking it up. Although the first day I ever worked for my dad, he made me sit down and read the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, to obviously learn a bit about it.
How long is that?
Oh, God knows. Too long. A couple hundred, I don't know, maybe like 150, 200 pages of just boring policy.
Nice.
But sat reading that. But yeah, mostly just from looking, and a lot of people can learn just from looking at what gets approved. There does tend to be, a lot of the time, not always, some planners are a little bit rogue, but a lot of the time there is a process and there is a logic behind what gets approved. And yeah, I all of a sudden realised I'm quite good at this.
Yeah. So you taught yourself how to use things like the mapping software, but growing up was what gave you the knowledge of
base,
like how to navigate your way through. Right, you've got a piece of land, but to most people it's just a piece of land. But how to turn that into something that makes money, or to assume that it's not going to make money. You kind of learned that growing up.
Yeah, and things like option agreements and the purchase contracts and generally how you structure those deals. That was all the kind of conversations I had with my dad, and I don't know what prompted that. Maybe I asked, maybe we'd just talk about it, but I wasn't in the office. It would have been, in sort of at the house or in the car or whatever, but that's the conversation we used to have. And then, so I knew, the value of an option agreement and getting a site on an option at one price, knowing that when it gets planning, it's worth another, and that I can sell that to a developer.
Yeah.
So then, the two industries kind of came together with being a land agent.
So, okay, that's really interesting. And then you decided to up and leave. Mm-hmm. What did you go on to do?
I always remember I had a week completely off work whilst I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just sat in the sun. It was like a really sunny...
you didn't have anything to go on to?
I didn't have anything to go on to.
Okay.
I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew I was too unhappy as a person for it to be worth carrying on doing. So I had this week off where I was just like eating fab lollies in the sun. And then I vividly remember it to this day. And I worked for a company that was in a group of companies. So I'd moved from Fine and Country to another company doing the same thing. And within that group of companies, there was a tax specialist in stamp duty, which is what we pay on property transactions, as you know. And the more complex the property transaction, the more opportunities there is to reduce stamp duty. So, for example, development land, there's often a reduction on stamp duty. If you're paying 3% additional loading on residential, there's often ways to knock that off. And it gets really clever, actually. And I find that, I don't know what it is about that, but I find that whole process really interesting. The way you can, use, they're not even loopholes, they're reliefs that are available. Yeah. They're just not really very well known. And the guy that ran that company had a few times mentioned that, if I was to ever leave, like, he'd really appreciate me coming to work for him, because obviously, one, I understood the development side, and then all I had to do was be taught about stamp duty, and I could then talk to developers with a level of understanding that maybe people who didn't come from a development background could. So I did that for a while. That was like I can't remember how long I did that for, maybe 6-9 months.
You went and worked for them?
Yeah, but it was on like a freelance sort of basis, like remotely, kind of commission only, just doing that with agents, and basically get a deal in and get a reduction, and we'd take 25% of what was saved.
Yes.
If that makes sense. If you save 10 grand, we'd take 2.5. And obviously I'd take a fee out of that. And I just did that in a bit of it was quite fun, quite enjoyable, quick turnaround in deal. So I could do a deal 1 month and get paid on it that month. And I was like, this is revolutionary.
Yeah.
And it was just nice to kind of take obviously I'd been very unhappy at the previous job. So to just sort of take a bit of pressure off and just enjoy what I was doing was really nice. And it was in that time period I also worked a little bit with my dad. So then I started going back and working with Cassidy Group, and actually feeling like I could bring something to the team at that point. Because when I was younger and I'd done, a month here or whatever before starting as a land agent, it was like, oh, you're the director's daughter. You're just basically, you're not doing anything. You're making tea and reading the MPPF in the corner and getting paid for it. Or like I was going to site and helping set out foundations only for it have to be redone later on because I did it wrong or something. Yeah. So coming back the second time,
you felt like you came back with value.
I felt I'm actually bringing something to the team now. I've got a skill set, I've got contacts, I can add something. So then after about 6 to 9 months with the stamp duty, I started transitioning back into Cassidy Group, and then I don't know what year it would have been. I remember it was the March for some reason of whatever year. It was the year I turned 22 actually, so 4 years ago. I went back to Cassidy Group full time, which was really fun, and it was great. But I just did stamp duty for a random 6 months of my career.
That is a really random thing to have have just kind of done a little bit on the
segue
side.
Into it. Yeah, it's just a really, I don't know, I geek out on it, but I just find it really interesting the way you can layer these different reliefs and go from, some deals it'd be like £500,000 stamp duty liability down to you got to pay at least 1%, down to a 1%, which was maybe 50 grand or something. And it's
and then you would make 25%. Or the
company would, and then I think maybe I got 30% commission or something.
Okay. So what stopped you from going from college and just going, right, I'm going to come in to the family business, and because I know you said you didn't feel like you could add a lot of value. What stopped you from just staying there, learning what you wanted to learn, and then adding the value that way? Because you kind of went on a bit of a roundabout way of upskilling yourself, whether you kind of did that intentionally or not. But I'm just interested to know what stopped you going. What made you think,
sticking at it.
I'm gonna go into property, but I'm not gonna work for the family business?
A bit of stubbornness
Okay.
of like, I want to
Make my own way.
make my own way. My dad is also renowned for not being good at delegating. So I would really have to forge my own route in my dad's business. And without leaving, I wouldn't have known what that route could look like if I stayed within it, if that makes sense. I would always be like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do next? And I didn't feel fulfilled in that sort of role. So I maybe could have stuck it out, but when I came back, I knew what I could then bring. Whereas I don't know if I'd got to that, I would have got to that point if I stayed. Yeah. But also I think kind of, again, linking back to that, like when I was younger, like wanting to get a degree to make my parents happy sort of thing, I felt like just working for my dad was a cop-out. So if I'm not going to go to uni, but you're at least going to make something aside from the family business on your own. So yeah, it was like a pride thing, a stubbornness, pride, whatever you want to call it. Which sometimes I look back and think, God, you know, I should have just applied what I knew in the family business. But hindsight, you know.
Yeah. So you've done some really big projects. What was it that's made you go, do you know what, I'm not going to continue with the family business doing these big projects. I'm going to take on my own business. I'm going to do this myself.
Yeah.
You and Tyler, obviously, as business partners. What was it that drew you away from the family business and into starting your own?
Two things. One, that I want to prove I can do it on my own mindset, which don't know if that helps or hinders. I just wanted to give it a go on my own, basically. And it felt like the right time. Me and Tyler had the one business together that works as a cash flow vehicle for a development business. So it was partly, just wanting to do it on my own. And then in terms of why we went for, you know, your more standard residential over the, you know, high density stuff, is I wouldn't have a track record strong enough with a bank for, if I said, oh, I want £30 million debt for a big student site, because, I've got some links to the family business, but they would have wanted to see probably my dad as like involved in the deal. So for us, doing the smaller stuff like Cambridge, my experience profile gave me access to that level of debt, which is still, you know, several million, but not tens of million. So it's kind of like a, it's a stepping stone. And ultimately we do want to get into big high density accommodation, and some of the sites that I'm in negotiations with now and looking at now are potentially that for the future. But the first sites were going to have to be smaller residential to tick that box with the bank. But also, obviously, on the education side as well, we produce content, right? And it's more relatable to our potential consumer base to deliver, you know, smaller sites of residential housing. I say smaller because if you think of like Taylor Wimpey doing 200 houses, 17 is a small site. It's more attainable. So the sort of content we produce, there's like a flywheel effect between the two businesses in that sense. So it made sense for both aspects of the business to do that sort of site. And also, I'd rather make mistakes on a smaller deal, like, you know, the Cambridge one, than a massive deal, which, you know, there have been mistakes made. One, with the timelines it's taken to get to where we are. And two, the other mistake was only having one deal. I wanted to focus on one deal, make the mistakes, but now I'm like sat waiting around. So we've had to like build up a pipeline, which we've now obviously started to get. You know, the pipeline's sat around 50 mil now, which is great. But yeah, it was... that was probably the main reason for opting for what seems like an unusual site to go for, but there was a thought process.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, then make sure that you click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss any uploads. It would mean so much to me personally, and also really help us out as a channel.